Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and after just over 2 weeks, MPs have finally returned back to Parliament in order to begin emergency debates and to ensure that Boris Johnson is not able to drive through his ruinous no-deal Brexit next month. And well, with what's been going on today, I'm actually going to need several videos over it, but unfortunately the bugger of having to do this alongside work, at least for the next few months, means that they may come out a little later as well. But let's get on with the first one. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So ahead of Parliament reconvening at 11:30 this morning, there were some interesting things being passed on to the media. So the BBC were reporting an unnamed cabinet minister saying that Boris Johnson had completely lost control of the process, which was a pretty frank admission that whatever plans and contingency plans that the government were working on were now completely in tatters. Remember a few weeks ago when Boris Johnson was being kicked all over the shop by Parliament in that single week when they were actually able to sit? Dominic Cummings was telling his staff to stay cool like the Fonzie. He said that their opponents would break down and make a mistake. Even then it was desperate stuff, a frank acknowledgement that his plans had failed and he was now utterly dependent on errors from his political opponent. Like a game of chess where you're desperately hoping that your opponent hasn't just seen that stupid thing you've done with your queen. But we have seen the stupid thing that Boris has done with our queen, and if he thought that a single week back after summer was bad enough, well, now he's got to face the House of Commons for rather longer, and they're not happy with him. In fact, they're furious with his reckless assault on our constitution. I am expecting them to make him absolutely suffer. He's a lame duck prime minister with a self-inflicted minority government with some of the thickest MPs in senior positions in his cabinet, and a chief political advisor with delusions of grandeur whose schemes have utterly crumbled to dust one by one and just doesn't seem to be facing up to the reality that he's just not as clever as he thinks he is. And to cap it all, there's been the serious allegations that the government have been ordering civil servants to break the law. Now that Johnson's government is effectively broken, they might now be feeling the heat of such compulsions and be doing all they can to cover themselves from blame for any future investigations. I cannot wait for a half-decent government to eventually take control and launch investigations into exactly what it was Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson were ordering Whitehall to do with that data. John McDonnell of Labour was saying something interesting. So words to the effect of, he was remarking that perhaps the wider Conservative Party may now be pausing for thought and considering whether they should still be supporting Boris Johnson. After all, the Conservative Party is all about laissez-faire, maintaining the status quo. Well, the intentions and actions of Boris Johnson have been anything but preserving the status quo. It's been to rip a hole right through the Constitution in order to crawl through to his mythical unicorn farm. The unicorns don't exist, but he's literally tearing down the ancestral home to find them. But it does appear that a number of cabinet ministers are reportedly uneasy about the way the government have chosen to attack our judiciary. And that's what they've been doing. They've been absolutely doubling down on attacking Parliament, attacking the judiciary, making it a case of the people against these institutions. Michael Gove was earlier labelling Boris Johnson as a winner, but as Prime Minister, he's won nothing. He lost a by-election. He lost every vote in Parliament in the single week that they've been sitting before he shut them down. He lost his slender majority. He lost the humble address. He lost the deal he thought he had based on some brainless assumptions about how customs work. And now he's lost in the highest court in the land. The only thing he's on course to win is the most pathetic Prime Minister in history. When Parliament did convene, you'd have been disappointed if you were expecting an apology from any of these ministers. Like Trump, the strategy has been, as I say, to double down on this untenable position. He's playing the part of the plucky Prime Minister standing up for the will of the people against the evil parliamentarians, judges and, well, anyone else in the country with a brain and a sense of honour. That's the narrative he's utterly dependent upon in order to prevent him crashing out of history as the shortest serving Prime Minister and the only one never to have won a vote in Parliament. But opposition in Parliament have a narrative it wants to build as well, of a would-be dictator brought low by the real sovereign power in the UK. Little of significance can really happen now because, well, Parliament needs that extension before it can do anything. So you would think, although another video tomorrow might shine a further light on this, but you would think at the moment October the 19th is the date we're all looking for. Jeremy Corbyn is so far sticking to the sensible line of insisting on avoiding no deal before triggering a general election. So until that extension is secure, he's not backing any moves which could trigger that early election. And given that Johnson wouldn't seek an extension without being legally compelled to, there's no chance of anything happening before that extension is secure. You know, the period of time now is just so that MPs can carry on kicking the crap out of Boris Johnson and his government, inflict more defeats, expose more impotence, make him squirm in the full public glare. Yes, this is dangerous still because Johnson and his ministers are, as I say, pitting the people and against the Parliament and the courts. But if Bojo wants any relief at all, then he'll need to stick to his original plan for a Queen's speech on October the 14th, for which he will be allowed to prorogue for a few days before just to get that ready. Actually, another thought occurs about this illegal prorogation. It meant that the Lib Dems got their conference completely uninterrupted. Labour got most of their conference, but the Conservatives will have full disruption for their conference, which begins this weekend. Largely, MPs are going to have to stay away because they're going to be needed in Parliament to reduce the scale of the humiliation on their blighted leader. Various MPs have mooted the idea that Johnson will somehow get Theresa May's deal through Parliament with a tweak or two to make it look a little bit different. No. I mean, there was never a majority for that, but what there is now is a majority for a public vote on whatever terms of a withdrawal, with Remain as an option. So the only way to get the government to pass a deal through Parliament is now on the condition of a confirmatory referendum. Now, if he did that, he would absolutely get it through. But that's the only thing that can succeed. But he doesn't want to do that because then that is going to be opposed by all the people supporting him. His support base don't want that. They want a no deal. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. In terms of the exchanges in Parliament itself, I'm just going to focus in this video on Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney General, because it was pretty unpleasant. He was very carefully questioned about who knew what and when. He was completely out of his depth because, of course, he was defending the indefensible. He wasn't willing to say who knew what or when they knew it in terms of the prorogation advice. At one point, Ken Clarke, former Conservative now, stood up to say that the Conservatives would be getting very excited if a Corbynista government behaved as Johnson had done. To which a Labour MP called out, "How about you heading it up?" But that's true, isn't it? You know, all these people that are going, how disgraceful it is that the courts have behaved in this way, turn it on its head. What would they be doing if the tables were turned, if Jeremy Corbyn were the Prime Minister, if he'd prorogued Parliament for this purpose, if it had gone to court, if the courts had have said, no, you can't do that's illegal? They wouldn't be saying that the court shouldn't have said that. They wouldn't be saying that judges were wrong. They'd be whooping and hollering how justice had been done. Thank God for our independent judiciary. But no. So Cox's defence seemed to be that the courts had somehow made up a new law. Rather odd for that to be said by not only a QC, but also an MP, to not actually realise that it's Parliament that make the laws and the judiciary who interpret them. Needless to say, all Cox was doing was following his boss's lead in doubling down on the stupid. It looks hopelessly out of touch to anyone who's paying any attention at all. But of course, that's not what it's for. The audience are the idiots out there who misunderstand this belligerence for there being some doubt about the legal position, who might actually believe that the judges got it wrong, whether deliberately or accidentally. And the gutter press will back them up, of course. One of the curious events of prorogation was that the cabinet ministers were not themselves shown the legal advice about prorogation. This is highly suspicious in itself. Geoffrey Cox claimed that he did not withhold the advice from his cabinet colleagues, which of course begs the question, then who did? Because the only person more senior, really, for this purpose, would be the Prime Minister. Cox then went down a path he may come to regret. He went on the attack and massively overstepped the line, and he said, I'm going to quote it quite carefully because it was as shocking as it is disgraceful. He said, "This Parliament is a dead Parliament. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches." Well, in this country, it is the people, the voting public, who elect our representatives to sit on those green benches. So until the people vote them out, then they not only have the right to sit on those benches, but a duty. And never mind all this rubbish about a general election. It's only been 2.5 years since we had the last one. The law basically says, under most circumstances, it should be every 5 years. There is no reason to have a general election now. If Parliament decides to vote for one, that's fine. But to say that is absolutely disgraceful, especially for a government whose legitimacy is far more questionable, given that they command no majority in the House. But that statement is right out of the dictator's handbook. The arrogant belief that certain people are born to rule, and how dare lesser people question them. It's the mindset of the elitist, not a guardian of the people. Unsurprisingly, the statement did not go down at all well with the rest of the MPs. So the only real answer that the Attorney General did give was to a question about whether the government would comply with the Benn Act. This is the law that compels the Prime Minister to sign a letter requesting an extension on October the 19th if either Parliament haven't voted for a deal or they haven't voted for no deal. The Attorney General replied that the government would comply. However, the government then sought to go back on that through the media, suggesting that though the Attorney General believes that the Prime Minister will comply, the Prime Minister himself is obviously not wanting to say that he will at all. So there is still serious doubt about that. And the only problem here is that although Geoffrey Cox may believe that the Prime Minister will comply, it's Boris Johnson who actually needs to do the complying. Personally, I'm not sure which I prefer. For Johnson to simply comply with the law like a good little boy, or for him to resist, be slapped down by the courts again, and then have to comply, or go to prison, whatever you prefer. And finally, the spectre of the politicised judiciary was muted. The judiciary is the last bastion of defence against populism in the UK. With the Supreme Court political, as is the case in the US, where there would have been nothing to have stopped the UK continue along the same path that 1930s Germany took, the idea of not having independent judges in our courts will hopefully always remain abhorrent to the majority of MPs in our Parliament. But of course the problem is all it takes is for one crooked Parliament to ever materialise, and it could be gone. But that's where I'll leave it for part one. It's a bit of a bind, as I say, with having to fit this around work now. There will be more coming. It may be much later on tonight. It may not be till tomorrow, but I will be getting onto it. Hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please get the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.